When the last of Ragnar's elite guards saw their king fall, they faced a choice that would echo through Valhalla itself: surrender and live as slaves, or die as warriors and feast with the gods. Their answer would terrify an entire army. This is the story of 13 Vikings who chose eternal glory over temporary life, and how their last stand at Stamford Bridge became the most heroic sacrifice in warrior history. The great raid on England had failed. King Harold Godwinson's army had caught Ragnar's forces at Stamford Bridge, and what should have been a glorious Viking victory had turned into devastating defeat. Ragnar Lothbrok lay dead on the battlefield, his legendary luck finally exhausted. The great heathen army was scattered, fleeing back to their ships in panic and disorder. Hundreds of Viking warriors were already running for the coast, abandoning their weapons and their honor in desperate flight. But 13 warriors had not fled. These were Ragnar's personal guard, his chosen elite, men who had sworn blood oaths to their king and lived by the strictest Viking honor code. The huscarls of legend. These weren't ordinary raiders. They were the huscarls, elite professional warriors who had served Ragnar for decades, fought beside him in 50 battles, and shared mead with him in the halls of kings. Now they stood in a circle around their fallen king's body, 13 warriors against 3,000 English soldiers. The mathematics were simple: certain death. But for Vikings who lived by honor, mathematics meant nothing compared to the choice between a glorious death and a shameful life. What they chose next would create a legend that English warriors would speak of in whispered awe for generations. These 13 men represented the pinnacle of Viking warrior culture. Each had earned his place through exceptional skill, absolute loyalty, and proven courage in the deadliest battles across Europe. Gunnar the Bear Slayer, Ragnar's shield brother for 20 years, famous for killing a brown bear with only a sayax dagger. His strength was legendary even among Vikings. Eric Blood Eagle, master of the curved sword, who had personally executed 3 enemy kings using the ritual that bore his name. Thorvald Iron Arm, the strategist of the group whose tactical mind had saved Ragnar's army in desperate situations countless times. Bjorn Wolfheart, the youngest at only 19, but already proven in 12 major battles and blessed by the Norns with supernatural battle luck. The sacred oaths. Each of these warriors had sworn the same blood oath to Ragnar. By Thor's hammer and Odin's spear, I pledge my life, my sword, and my death to my king. If he falls in battle, I shall follow him to Valhalla within the same sunset, or forfeit my place among the honored dead. This wasn't just military loyalty. It was a sacred bond witnessed by the gods themselves. Breaking such an oath meant eternal dishonor, exclusion from Valhalla, and the fate of wandering Midgard as a cursed Draugr. The elite training. These men had trained together for years in Ragnar's personal war camp. They knew each other's fighting styles perfectly, could anticipate each other's moves in battle, and fought as a single organism with 13 deadly parts. Their weapons were masterworks forged by the finest smiths in Scandinavia. Their armor was decorated with runes of protection blessed by the most powerful cider workers. Their skills had been honed through constant combat across the known world. The unbreakable bond. More than warriors, they were brothers. They had shared bread in lean times, divided treasure after victories, tended each other's wounds, and sung together in the halls of conquered kings. Gunnar had saved Eric's life at the siege of Paris. Thorvald had carried wounded Bjorn for 3 days through enemy territory. Each man in this circle had bled for the others, and each would die for them without hesitation. The moment of choice. Now they stood around Ragnar's body while 3,000 English soldiers approached from all sides. They could hear the enemy commanders calling for their surrender, promising them life if they laid down their weapons. The easy choice was obvious. Surrender, live as prisoners, eventually earn freedom or ransom. The hard choice was equally obvious. Honor their oath, die fighting, and join their king in Valhalla. 13 pairs of eyes met across their fallen king's body. No words were needed. They all knew what Viking honor demanded. The sacred decision. Gunnar spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years brotherhood. Brothers, we all know why we're here. Ragnar is dead. Our oath binds us to follow him. Eric nodded grimly. The English offer us chains disguised as mercy. I would rather feed the ravens than live as any man's slave. Thorvald, ever the strategist, laid out their tactical situation with brutal honesty. We are 13. They are thousands. This bridge is narrow. We can hold it for a time, but we cannot win. The Viking philosophy. Young Bjorn looked around the circle of hardened warriors and asked the question they all understood. What is the difference between a good death and a bad death? Gunnar answered with the wisdom of decades. A good death is chosen. A bad death is suffered. A good death serves honor. A bad death serves only fear. Eric added, we came to England as free men and warriors. If we leave as prisoners and slaves, what were we ever worth? The mathematical reality. Thorvald mapped out their situation with tactical precision. The bridge is 12 paces wide. If we form shield wall, they can only attack us 3 men at a time. We can hold for perhaps an hour before exhaustion takes us. An hour of glorious battle, Gunnar mused. Most men never get 10 minutes of true glory in their entire lives. And, Eric smiled grimly, we'll send enough of them to hell that they'll remember this day forever. The sacred preparation. The decision made, they began the ancient ritual of preparation for glorious death. Each warrior spoke his death prayer to the gods, requesting a place in Valhalla and promising to die with weapons in hand. They sharpened their weapons one final time, not for maintenance, but for ceremony. They adjusted their armor not for protection, but for appearance. They would die looking like the elite warriors they were. Most importantly, they spoke their final words to each other, the brotherhood bonds that would carry into the afterlife. The English approach. Across the bridge, English commanders were organizing their assault. 3,000 soldiers, confident in their overwhelming numbers, prepared to crush the last Viking resistance. King Harold's captain called out one final surrender offer. Vikings, your king is dead. Your army is scattered. Lay down your weapons and you will be spared. Gunnar's response echoed across the battlefield. We are Ragnar's oath-sworn guard. We go where our king goes. If you want our weapons, come and take them. The English began their advance. The perfect battlefield. Stamford Bridge was perhaps the most perfect defensive position 13 warriors could hope for. The stone bridge was narrow, only wide enough for 3 men to fight abreast. This meant the English couldn't use their numerical advantage effectively. The approach was uphill from the English side, giving the Vikings the high ground advantage their ancestors had used to devastating effect for centuries. The bridge itself was sturdy stone, providing stable footing for their defensive formation. Behind them lay only the Yorkshire countryside. No retreat, no escape, no possibility except victory or death. The shield wall formation. The 13 arranged themselves in the classic Viking shield wall, but adapted for their unique situation. The front rank consisted of Gunnar, Eric, and Thorvald, their 3 most experienced fighters, standing shoulder to shoulder with overlapping shields. Behind them, the second rank positioned spears over their shoulders, creating a deadly hedge of iron points that would meet any charging enemy. The third rank served as reserves, ready to step forward as front-rank warriors fell. Bjorn, the youngest, took position in the center of the second rank, protected by his brothers but close enough to prove his courage. The weapon selection. Each warrior chose his weapons for maximum effectiveness in bridge combat. Long axes for reaching over shields, swords for close combat when the shield wall collapsed, and sayax daggers for the final moments when death became personal. Gunnar wielded his legendary bear-slaying axe, its head inscribed with runes of victory. Eric carried the curved sword that had executed kings, its blade still hungry for noble blood. Thorvald held both sword and shield, ready to adapt to changing tactical needs. Their armor told the story of decades of victory. Mail shirts taken from conquered enemies, helmets decorated with gold earned in successful raids, arm rings gifted by grateful jarls. The psychological warfare. As the English army massed for their assault, the 13 began their death song. the ancient chant Vikings sang when facing overwhelming odds. Their voices carried across the battlefield, deep and harmonious, speaking of honor, courage, and welcome death. The song told their enemies exactly what they faced, not desperate men fighting for their lives, but chosen warriors celebrating their approaching deaths. The psychological effect was immediate and unsettling. English soldiers, expecting to face panicked survivors, instead heard confident voices singing of glory and Valhalla. Some began to murmur that these Vikings had been touched by their gods. The final moments of peace. In the final moments before battle, each warrior made his personal peace with approaching death. They thought of wives and children back in Scandinavia, of battles fought and victories won, of the mead halls where their stories would be told. Gunnar touched the Thor's hammer pendant at his throat. Eric whispered a prayer to Odin for a warrior's death. Thorvald mentally reviewed tactical contingencies one last time. Bjorn gripped his sword and promised himself he would die well. Across the bridge, 3,000 English soldiers began their advance. The morning sun glinted off countless spear points and sword blades as the army moved forward like a slow-motion avalanche of death. The 13 warriors smiled. The first assault. The English charged the bridge with overwhelming confidence, certain that numbers alone would crush the last Viking resistance within minutes. The first wave consisted of heavy infantry, professional soldiers with shields, swords, and years of combat experience. They crashed into the Viking shield wall like waves against a cliff. Gunnar's axe took the first English soldier in the chest, splitting mail and ribs with devastating force. Eric's curved sword swept in a deadly arc, opening throats and severing sword arms. Thorvald's precise spear work found gaps in armor with surgical accuracy. The narrow bridge forced the English to attack only 3 abreast, negating their numerical advantage and turning their massive army into a series of small group combats, exactly what the elite Vikings excelled at. The tactical brilliance. What became immediately clear was the enormous skill gap between elite Vikings and regular English soldiers. These 13 had spent decades perfecting the art of killing, while many of their opponents were farmers and craftsmen pressed into military service. The Vikings fought with ruthless efficiency. Every movement was calculated, every strike designed for maximum damage. They conserved energy, while their enemies exhausted themselves in desperate attacks against superior defensive positions. Most devastating was their coordination. The 13 fought as a single organism, anticipating each other's moves, covering each other's flanks, rotating fresh fighters to the front as others tired. The enemy's growing fear. After 30 minutes of futile assault, the English began to understand what they were facing. These weren't desperate survivors. They were master warriors choosing their moment of greatest glory. Bodies piled up at the bridge approaches as wave after wave of attackers fell to Viking steel. The narrow confines meant that English dead actually began hindering their own advances, creating obstacles that the Vikings used to further advantage. Worse for English morale, these Vikings were clearly enjoying themselves. Between attacks, they joked with each other, sang fragments of battle songs, and taunted their enemies with cheerful contempt. The individual heroes. Each of the 13 found his moment of individual glory during the battle. Gunnar killed 17 men in personal combat, his bear-slaying axe becoming legend among the English survivors. Eric's sword work was so graceful, it resembled a deadly dance, each strike flowing into the next with artistic precision. Young Bjorn, fighting his first battle as a full warrior, earned his adult name by holding the center of the line single-handed when both flanking warriors were temporarily wounded. Even as they died, each warrior achieved something beyond mere survival. They achieved the immortal glory that Vikings valued above life itself. The tide turns. But 13 men, no matter how skilled, could not hold indefinitely against thousands. Exhaustion began to tell. Wounds accumulated. Weapons grew heavy in tired hands. The first to fall was Eric, taking a spear thrust through a gap in his mail while engaged with 3 opponents simultaneously. He died laughing, his curved sword still moving in deadly arcs until his heart stopped beating. Then, Thorvald fell, overwhelmed by 6 English soldiers who had finally learned to coordinate their attacks. His tactical mind worked until the end, calling out warnings and opportunities to his remaining brothers. One by one, the 13 were dying the deaths they had chosen. The last stand intensifies. With only 3 Vikings remaining, Gunnar, Bjorn, and the wounded warrior Olaf, the English expected quick victory. Instead, they found that desperation had made the survivors even more dangerous. Fighting back-to-back in a triangle formation, the 3 created a circle of death that no English soldier could penetrate. Their weapons moved in constant motion, creating a barrier of steel that meant instant death for anyone who came too close. Gunnar, covered in blood, both his own and his enemies, fought with the fury of a man who knew he was writing the final chapter of his legend. Every swing of his axe was perfect, every movement economical and deadly. The English respect. Something unprecedented began to happen among the English ranks. Instead of pressing their advantage, many soldiers began to hesitate, then to stop fighting altogether. These were warriors who understood courage when they saw it. What they were witnessing wasn't just combat. It was the purest expression of warrior honor they had ever seen. English commanders found their own men reluctant to continue the assault. Veterans who had fought in dozens of battles stood transfixed, watching Vikings die the most glorious deaths in military history. Some English soldiers began to openly weep, not from fear, but from admiration for courage they knew they could never match. Bjorn's moment. Young Bjorn, fighting his first and last battle as a full warrior, achieved immortality in his final moments. Surrounded by 6 English soldiers, he killed 4 of them in a whirlwind of sword and shield work that left the survivors backing away in awe. When the final English spear found his heart, Bjorn was smiling. His last words, spoken loudly enough for both armies to hear, became legend. Tell them in Valhalla that Bjorn Wolfheart died well. The English soldier who had killed him actually knelt beside his body in respect, a gesture unprecedented in medieval warfare. Gunnar's final stand. Gunnar the Bear Slayer, last of the 13, found himself alone on the bridge surrounded by hundreds of English soldiers. His armor was destroyed, his body pierced by dozens of wounds, his legendary axe notched and bloodied. What happened next would be talked about in English halls for generations. Instead of overwhelming him with numbers, the English army simply stopped. No one wanted to be the man who killed such perfect courage. For long moments, Gunnar stood alone in the center of the bridge, swaying from blood loss but still holding his axe, still ready to fight. The entire English army watched in respectful silence. The honorable end. When Gunnar finally fell, it was not from English weapons, but from his wounds and exhaustion. He died standing, leaning on his axe, facing his enemies with his eyes open. The English army stood in complete silence for long minutes after his death. Then, spontaneously, they began to bang their weapons against their shields, the ancient salute given only to the bravest enemies. King Harald himself came forward to look upon the body of the last Viking. His words became part of English legend. These were not men. These were heroes from the songs of old. We shall never see their like again. The bridge at Stamford became known as the Bridge of Heroes, and English mothers would tell their children stories of the 13 Vikings who chose glory over life. The gods' recognition. In the great hall of Valhalla, Odin himself rose from the high seat as 13 warriors approached the golden doors. The Allfather had been watching their battle with growing admiration, and now he prepared to welcome them as honored Einherjar. Jar. Come, Odin called to them, you who have shown what it means to choose honor over life. Your places at the high table have been prepared since the beginning of time. Ragnar, already seated among the honored dead, raised his horn of mead as his loyal guard entered the hall where brave warriors feast until Ragnarok. The eternal brotherhood. The 13 took their places at the tables of heroes, joining the company of all warriors who had died gloriously throughout history. Their wounds were healed, their strength restored, but the bonds forged in life and sealed in death remained unbroken. They would feast and fight and sing until the end of the world, their courage remembered in both Midgard and Asgard. The choice they made at Stamford Bridge had earned them not just death, but eternal glory. The living legend. Back in the world of the living, their story spread like wildfire. English bards sang of their courage in halls from York to London. Viking skalds carried the tale back to Scandinavia, where it inspired generations of warriors to seek their own glorious deaths. The bridge at Stamford became a pilgrimage site where warriors came to swear oaths and test their courage. English knights, when facing impossible odds, would remind each other, "Remember the 13 Vikings. They showed us what honor looks like." For 13 men had proven that some things are more valuable than life itself, and the true warriors choose how they die. Their last stand became the standard by which all future courage would be measured. At Stamford Bridge, 13 Vikings chose Valhalla over surrender. Their choice echoed through eternity, proving that heroes never truly die. They simply take their place among the immortal legends, waiting for us to join them in glory.